Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Outrage erupts nationwide after an Ohio Democrat outlines a plan to kill President Donald Trump by using the legal death penalty. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Governor Tim Walz are both attacked by agitators as the unrest in Minnesota reaches a complete boiling point. And President Trump warns the mayor of Minneapolis that he's playing with fire concerning his vow to oppose federal immigration operations at every turn. Also, a shocking prediction about the 2030 U.S. Census, and it spells big trouble for American Democrats. And New York City's socialist mayor takes a shot at stand-up comedy when he makes a surprise visit to The Tonight Show and cracks a corny joke about his progressive policies. All this and a bunch more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin here. Conservatives nationwide are in an absolute uproar after a Democratic candidate for Attorney General in Ohio promised to legally kill President Trump if he's ever elected to office. This guy is some brain surgeon. The candidate, a former failed state representative named Elliot Forhan, he even went so far as to outline his entire plan in great detail on social media. He says if he's ever put in charge of the law in the Buckeye State, he's going to rely on the legal process to try, convict, and ultimately execute the president. Somebody needs some counseling. More specifically, this guy, Forhan, has extreme confidence in his ability to use due process and present clear and compelling evidence at a fair trial in order to convince a jury of Trump's peers beyond any reasonable doubt that the president is somehow guilty of a capital offense. Like I said, this guy's some brain surgeon. Goes on to say that by the time it's all said and done, that verdict is going to eventually result in the death penalty, and that as a result, he's going to stand by his pledge and actually kill President Trump by legally executing him as promised. This guy's just a clown, and he's trying to get famous. As you can imagine, decent Americans all across this country, they are positively infuriated by Forhan's threats, and they're not holding anything back in their responses. In a nutshell, they're accusing him of being an evil and deranged psychopath who should be placed in a straitjacket, adding that some moderate Democrats are now apparently making things even worse, all by condoning outright political violence instead of simple impeachments. Now, the funny part is they wonder why they keep losing elections. And what do you think of all that, by the way? Leave us a comment here for us. We want to know what you're thinking. In the meantime, Ohio Republicans are pointing their finger directly at state Democrats and arguing that their silence regarding the vile comment and their failure to condemn it directly, it's everything you need to know about where they currently stand. Furthermore, they're now urging their counterparts to drastically turn down the angry political rhetoric of Democratic extremists before things in their state get any worse. Additionally, they say they continue to stand united with President Trump against any radicals who use repulsive threats to divide our country in any way. However, the candidate himself is sticking to his guns and refusing to back down in any way, and he now says he's running for Attorney General so that he can apply the law equally to everyone, and that if Donald Trump ever tries to end American democracy again, he'll hold him accountable to the full extent of the law. Hey, note to this wannabe Attorney General guy. President Trump has never tried to end democracy. Rather, he's tried to end lawlessness. In other words, you're an idiot. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. And here's the way it all pans out. Dateline 1865. I remember the date very well. A guy named Abe Lincoln out for a night watching the play with Mrs. Lincoln, and then some deranged lunatic approaches from behind, shoots him, and kills him. Apparently, his executioner didn't like the manner in which the Republican president was doing his job. 1975, Republican President Jerry Ford lives through two different assassination attempts, and one by Lynette Squeaky Fromme and the other by Sarah Jane Moore. Fast forward to 1981, John Hinckley Jr. attempts to assassinate Republican President Ronald Reagan, and fortunately, Mr. Hinckley fails miserably. Look, I'm not the brightest bulb in the box, but by some indications, apparently it's not overly healthy to be a Republican president who's trying to advance any number of important causes here in the USA and all over the globe. Now, this no-talent dirtbag, Elliot Forhan, Democratic candidate for Ohio Attorney General, is trying to make a name for himself with a reprehensible death threat against President Donald Trump. Now, I'm not exactly a lawyer, but I know some of the important rules, and this is one of them. Threatening the life of the President of the United States is a federal felony. Therefore, this forehand fellow should be immediately disbarred, face trial for threatening President Trump, and once the guilty verdict is rendered, he should be immediately locked up and for a good long stretch. Turning now to Minnesota, where both Representative Ilhan Omar and Governor Tim Walz are currently facing the full wrath and fury of hundreds of agitated voters who are completely fed up with the deteriorating quality of life right there in their home state. At a recent town hall held in her Minneapolis district, Representative Omar was physically attacked when a furious citizen ran up to her with a syringe and allegedly sprayed her with a foul-smelling liquid, which is now believed to be nothing more than apple cider vinegar. At the time, the Somalia-born congresswoman was holding court and railing against ICE operations in her city, and after the 55-year-old suspect was quickly arrested, she continued her diatribe by accusing the Trump administration of a litany of unsubstantiated crimes ranging from kidnapping to outright murder. A clearly annoyed Omar then resumed her rant by completely picking apart the federal government's immigration enforcement efforts in Minnesota, claiming ICE agents are intentionally intimidating genuine American citizens, well, they're not, and scaring people so badly that they're now afraid to leave their homes. Those are some lofty falsehoods there, sunshine. In the meantime, professional agitators, they are now seemingly targeting Governor Tim Walz as well. Hundreds of enraged protesters recently seen storming the Minnesota State Capitol building in St. Paul and gathering right outside his office door, where they begged loudly in unison and pleaded desperately for the governor to do his job. Now, the far-left mob then began calling for change by screaming a number of cliched slogans such as "Power to the people" and "No one is illegal," all while waving signs demanding justice for both Renee Good and Alex Preddy, who were each recently shot and killed during confrontations with federal agents. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. And here's the deal, and back to the Congresswoman for just a moment here. None of us here at the News Roundup are fans of this Ilhan Omar, but if the rumors are true about her having tens of millions of dollars in her bank account, then I'm going to overlook all of her misdeeds. Her goofy rhetoric, multiple marriages, and all the fraud in the district she represents in Minnesota. After all, I need a new pair of shoes, and I don't object to dining out at fancy eateries, especially if she's picking up the tab. That said, even though I think she's bad for her state, tragic for Minneapolis, wholly uncooperative with federal law enforcement agents, the White House agenda, and President Donald Trump, she does, in fact, have the right to speak freely and openly to her constituents and without interruption. Unfortunately, one moron who attended her town hall attempted to make contact with her by using something described as a goofy kind of putrid-smelling spray. Now, look, it's hard to say something nice about this woman, but kudos to her for not running out the door, jumping into a waiting limo to make a mad dash out of town. She stood her ground, continued her discussion, and she only left once she was finished speaking her mind. That said, I disagree with everything she yacked about during our meeting. She's entirely wrong about everything she said, and her thought process is highly convoluted. But she still has every right to voice her wrong opinion. By the way, I think it's extra nice of me to kind of point that out. For no extra money. I'm just a nice guy today. All right, we'll stay on topic now and turn our attention specifically to the Trump administration's latest attempt to restore calm and order to the Twin Cities area, despite local efforts to thwart them at every turn. After reportedly sharing a very positive phone call earlier this week, both President Trump and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey now retreating to their respective corners and preparing to square off against each other. Once again, sounds like a big night at the fights. For his part, Frey is now apparently showing his true colors by backpedaling on any type of perceived agreement he recently reached with the president to work hand in hand with the Trump administration regarding immigration enforcement. Now, taking it a step further, he's now doubling down and vowing to fight against ICE operations every chance he gets, saying that his only real goal is the safety of both his city and the people who live there, and that his team will never enforce any federal immigration laws no matter what. Meanwhile, President Trump himself now accusing the Minneapolis mayor of truly playing with fire by whistling a completely different tune after their previous understanding. He also says that Frey's most recent comments are essentially a total violation of the law. For now, the situation in the Twin Cities area continues to evolve by the hour. Now, Attorney General Mamdani has now arrived in that area to oversee charges against more than a dozen rioters who allegedly assaulted federal officers, and she says the Justice Department, they're just getting started. In the meantime, the 2 federal officers who were involved in the recent shooting of protester Alex Preddy have just been placed on administrative leave. And so you know, that's pretty much standard operating procedure whenever there is an officer-involved shooting. For his part, a forlorn Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, recently spotted paying a visit to a makeshift memorial for the fallen protester. Now says talk is cheap, that there needs to be true accountability for the tragedy, and that it's basically time for ICE to go. I kind of like the part where he mentions true accountability, and I'm just kind of thinking, I wonder if that applies to the $9 billion in fraud in his state as well. Final thought, and this is what we call the News Roundup Lowdown. You know, it's like this, and back to that Mayor Frey character for just a second. You know, if the President of the United States of America tells you you're playing with fire, it's a good idea to put the matches down, be a good soldier, and square yourself away. This young fella, the boss in Minneapolis, Mayor Frey, he just doesn't get it. And here's what he says. He says, Minneapolis does not and will not enforce federal immigration laws. Well, fine observation there, Skippy, but here's the deal. Nobody is asking you to enforce federal immigration laws. Rather, you're being asked to cooperate with federal law enforcement agencies in their effort to enforce immigration law. Work with the grown-ups. If you're not helping, you're hindering while creating and contributing to conflict and chaos. In other words, you're an adult. You are what we call a mayoral misfit. Another cogent point the bright, handsome, and highly effective young mayor makes. Look at him. He's young and he's handsome. He says this, the job of our police is to keep people safe, not enforce federal immigration laws. I want them preventing homicides. Well, like my pops used to say all those years ago, can't hurt to want. And look, the numbers, they don't lie. There were 64 homicides in Minneapolis in 2025, another 77 in 2024. How's that prevention thingy panning out for you, Mr. Mayor? Well, I'll reiterate the point that 47 made. Mr. Mayor, you're playing with fire, and oftentimes left unchecked. A small flare-up can turn into a blazing conflagration. We're just here to tell you to watch your step. Change things up just a bit now and pivot to an inspiring security guarantee from one of our country's top foreign allies. In a shocking rebuttal to China, the Prime Minister of Japan now says that if the communist regime ever attacks Taiwan, her nation will stand firmly alongside the U.S. to protect our combined citizens. Additionally, the Japanese leader says that if her military was ever working alongside American forces, which came under attack, and they simply fled without doing anything at all, our invaluable alliance would collapse entirely. Makes perfect sense. In case you're not aware, Japan has been enduring extreme diplomatic and economic pressure from the Chinese Communist Party since the end of last year, when they basically linked their military defense of Taiwan with the existential survival of their nation. Since then, the CCP has been doing everything in their power to make Japan pay for that pledge, while continuing to threaten to use any means necessary to bring the self-governing island nation of Taiwan under their tyrannical rule. All right, now some additional headlines. Couple of additional tidbits we're keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first, a bit of news from the international scene. President Trump is now urging Iran to come to the bargaining table and negotiate a fair peace deal before it's too late, warning the Islamic Republic that time is running out and that a massive armada currently heading their way. Iran, you got to think this through. In Washington, a new report from a prominent think tank says that up till now, nearly 1.2 million Russian troops have already been killed, wounded, or are missing since Moscow first invaded Ukraine. That was back in 2022, making it the highest casualty rate suffered by a major military power since the end of World War II. Also on Capitol Hill, Secretary of State Marco Rubio appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to spill the beans about our country's recent military action in Venezuela, saying the president reserves the right to do whatever it takes to safeguard the USA. Moving along, a new report spells bad news for die-hard Democrats following our country's next official census in 2030. That's coming up, with experts predicting that a number of red-leaning Republican states will likely get a substantial boost in both population and voting power after all is said and done. And if you're thinking about experimenting with one of those newfangled weight loss drugs, check this out. A growing number of angry people, they're now filing lawsuits against the companies that make Ozempic, Wegovy, and more, claiming they were never properly warned about the extreme health risk caused by a variety of severe side effects. Editor Pranav the Magnificent. Can we see a picture of a treadmill? Look, in life, you can take the shots, or you can take the pill, or you can jump on the machine. In time, those pounds will just melt away. And now a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news, and we kick things off today with something you need to know about the longest-running cartoon sitcom in American history, The Simpsons. According to multi-talented actor Hank Azaria, who voices a number of the show's legendary characters, including tavern owner Moe, police chief Wiggum, and more, he's currently under contract for another 3 years through the program's 40th season, at which time it's quite possible his voice talents are going to be replaced, so he thinks anyway, by AI. You know, over the years, there have been tons and tons of cartoon shows, from the Flintstones to the Jetsons, from the King of the Hill to South Park and all the rest. It doesn't really matter what your favorite cartoon show is, so long as it's The Simpsons, and nothing, not AI, not censorship, and not even the end of the world will bring an end to the best cartoon program on the planet. By the way, leave us a comment right here and tell us who your favorite Simpsons character is. And mine used to be Apu, the guy who ran the Quickie Mart on the program. He was a vegan, the father of 8, and had an authentic pretend PhD. And then he was written off the show. Apparently he was too smart for the other guys.
Jury duty. Oh, today I am truly an American citizen. Whew.
And in the world of TV, late-night talk show host Jimmy Fallon recently welcomed a novice wannabe stand-up comedian to the Tonight Show stage, and his surprise guest, none other than this guy, New York City Mayor, a guy called Zoran Mamdani, or as some folks have lately been calling him, Zoran Momkami. I don't like that, America. Now, for more than a month, Fallon has been boring his audience with a series of unfunny jokes that begin with the words, "It's so cold," and the 34-year-old Mamdani eagerly joined the party by ambling awkwardly onto that stage and spitting out this gag. "It's so cold in New York City, the rent froze." The rent froze itself. Imagine that. I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of The Tonight Show with that Jimmy Fallon guy, but what a treat for the show to feature the world-famous Mayor Zoran Mamdani. Once again, his legendary line, "It's so cold in New York City, the rent froze itself." Hello? Editor Pranav, why are you being so... Be generous. A little laugh track, a courtesy laugh track. Louder, louder. That's enough. Good job there, Mr. Mayor. People can't afford to live in your city. They say the subways aren't safe. Tons of homeless folks, gobs of trash, and good luck driving through Manhattan. I've been there. You know, best way to address those issues and more, simply yuck it up on a goofy late-night TV talk show. This guy to run for governor. He's a real gem of a leader. And with that, now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the big news roundups. Have an awesome day today. Stay safe. If you haven't done so already, come on now. Hit that subscribe button. With that, we're going to dim the lights. We're going to gently fade to black, and we'll see you right back here next time for another edition of the Big News Roundup.